And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am super excited to welcome Laura Griffin to the show. Laura has a brand new book just released a couple days ago, Laura.
That's
Laura,
right,
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And it is called Innocence Road. What a fun book this is. I'll have to tell you, Laura, I have gotten to know Texas fairly well over the last couple of years. My daughter and got married a few years ago, and her husband's in the Air Force and got stationed in Abilene, Texas. So not as far as Marfa, but there's a distinct culture to central to West Texas, and it's very different than everywhere else. And we've
It
made
is.
a number of trips out there. Um, anyway, I say all that to say Laura has really made a career of writing about Texas in interesting ways. And I'm really excited to talk to you today. So I said all that to say welcome to the show, Laura.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. Laura, I have a some fun questions that I like to start shows with sometimes just to kind of set the tone. And one of those questions is, what is the first piece of writing that you wrote? That's such a clunky way to say that. That made you feel like a writer.
Wow. Well, I started, even as a child, wrote poems and wrote
Hmm.
little short stories, things like that. But the first time, I just remember the feeling of feeling like a writer. I walked into the office of my college newspaper and I
Hmm.
volunteered to be a writer for the newspaper. And they gave me an assignment. And I went out and did the assignment. And a few days later, my byline appeared in the newspaper, and I picked up a copy of it on campus and saw my name, and I thought, oh, wow, my first byline. And that was the first moment where I felt official.
That's so exciting. So exciting. I just want to say welcome to everyone in the chat, NJ and Rob and Kay McCoy and Zarintha. Welcome, everybody. Um, Another question, Laura, do you believe in writer's block? And if so, what are some strategies you've developed over the years that help you defeat that?
Well, I started out as a newspaper reporter. So after I graduated college, I went and worked on a newspaper, and you don't really get to have writer's block on a
Right.
newspaper because, you have these really quick deadlines. You do have to finish your story by the end of the day or,
Yeah.
in the wee hours of the night. And so, and if you don't finish and you don't hit your deadline, the story doesn't appear in the paper. And by the next day, it's probably old news and they don't even need
Mm,
it. So, um, when you're working on those kind of quick turnaround times, you kind of just move forward and you don't really have time for paralysis of analysis. You just have to kind of move forward. And so
right.
I think that's kind of spilled over into my career as a fiction writer, that I just kind of run towards deadlines and I don't stop too much to overthink it, I guess. Um, I work well with deadlines. The times when it's hard for me is when I don't have a deadline, if I'm between contracts or something and everything is just kind of the blank. What's the next idea? But for that, I like to just go read because,
Mm,
when you read widely, especially nonfiction, it's just a great source of inspiration for ideas and, what would make an interesting story, what would make an interesting character. And that can kind of get your juices flowing again.
nothing like that creative meandering
That's
when you
right.
don't have a deadline. Yeah. I've gotten to meet a number of fiction writers who began their career as journalists or newspaper writers, and I often ask them, "Are is there a tool that's in your fiction writer's toolkit that you can look back and say this is because of my time?" And without fail, everyone says learning to write on deadline, learning to put your seat of your pants in the chair, do the work, and turn it in. I mean, without fail, everyone says that. So
Yeah,
apparently, that's a crucial skill that you learn pretty quickly in
you
that
really do.
business.
But one I would add to that, that I use all the time now, it's been really important, is just the need to go out and interview people,
Mm.
the need to go to a place in person and actually be there and get your eyes on it, meet people, because you learn so much about, if I'm starting a new character, whatever their job is, maybe they're a police investigator, maybe they're a forensic expert, maybe they're a criminal defense attorney, whatever their job is. I like to go meet people that do that job and talk to them about what are some misconceptions about your job, what are some pet peeves you have from doing this job. And you learn so much in those unique details that they give you. I love to weave those into the story because it can kind of bring a character to life. And it's really important to just do that stuff in person because, now you can do so much research on the internet, but
Sure.
you miss out on a lot of those details that are
Yeah.
so personal that you only really get when you are in a place. And so I think it's important to interview people and to go be in a place if you're going to write about it.
I love that you say that because I ask people that question about, what tools are in your toolbox that you got from, because in my mind, I'm envisioning, like, especially in a big city where you have numerous news agencies, newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, and they all have reporters that kind of descend on a scene and cover the same story. It's the same facts, a thing happened, but you maybe have 10 people that are observing it, and they're all going to report slightly differently because they notice different things or they talk to different people, or and you get a little different flavor of what happened. Even though it's one event, you've got different eyes from different perspectives, and from talking to different people, that you get subtly different. And that's actually what I'm looking for when I ask that. So I love that you kind of tuned into what I was trying to ask.
Yeah, and that's one reason I mean, I read a lot of news articles,
Yeah.
because I kind of have that news background, but I enjoy also more long form articles as well, like magazines, where you really get more of the author has more time to paint a
Hmm.
picture. And so
Right.
they can include some of those details that they observe, um, if they profile someone and they go interview them at their house or their ranch or their office, and they can kind of tell you, they can describe the scene and kind of give you some of that detail that helps you get a picture in your mind, because as fiction writers, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to paint a picture in someone's mind, and
Right.
they can fill in some of the gaps, but you want to give them some key details so that they can understand the character better.
Great. The last of the fun questions. Not that our entire
And then
conversation
the
is not going
unfun
to be fun.
questions.
Yeah. The what is the best piece of writing advice you ever got, and did you take it? Did you act on it?
Well, I would probably say from my news editor, he always said, get out of your chair. Don't just sit on the phone and write your story. Go
Yeah.
to where people are. Get out of the office and go to where people are. And it goes back to what we were just talking about, that when you are in a place in person, you can observe so much more. And even just the way people talk, the jargon that they use, the office culture, how do people interact with the people around them? Is there kind of a joking atmosphere? Is there a dry kind of, when you're interviewing cops, for example, and people that do kind of sometimes forensic experts, things like that, I've noticed there's kind of a dry, macabre sense of humor that permeates some of those places. So, that's fun to kind of bring in to your fictional story if you've been to a place in person and you've gathered up those details.
So the flip side of that question is, what is the worst piece of writing advice you ever received, and did you act on it?
That's interesting. The thing that pops into my head is I read somewhere along the way in some writing, craft book, never use a prologue. Prologues are just they're low stakes and they take away, from the book and from the main story. And I think that sometimes that can be true. And I've certainly
Yeah.
read plenty of prologues that were kind of yawners, but I've also read some that were very effective, and I think used sparingly
Yeah.
in the right situation, they can be really helpful and kind of grab the reader into the story. So I think, I don't think hard and fast rules necessarily make sense all the time. I think it's all about how you do things. So, some of the best stories out there are stories where the writer just kind of broke all the rules and did something
Yeah.
nobody's done before and somehow pulled it off. So I guess it's more about how do you execute breaking the rules? Do you do
Right.
it successfully or not?
Yeah. And the type of books that you write, especially mystery, suspense thrillers, a well-used prologue can plant a seed, especially for a future reveal, that just will kind of haunt the back of the mind of the reader, especially if the payoff for that prologue is not until maybe the middle of the book or so. But
Yeah.
you're reading and you're getting into the setting and learning the characters, but this nagging thing is in the back of your mind. Well, I know this thing is going to happen. How does it happen? Or I got a glimpse, a flash of something. How is this going to unfold? And if used that way, especially in your type of genre, that can be really effective. And the people that say never use this, well, yeah, never
Yeah.
listen to advice of people that say never. But your books, first off, Innocence Road is what number book for you?
Innocence Road is book 29.
29. Amazing.
Yeah.
Have they all been set in Texas?
Actually, no. Most of them have been set in Texas, and I have several series that are set in Texas. So even though the characters move around, and there might be a road trip or something like that, the heart of the story is set in Texas. I do have a series that I write with another author,
Yeah.
Allison Brennan. She's a suspense author, and she, when we started our series together, she lived in California, and we decided to set our series in Southern California. And so the setting for that series called Moreno and Heart Mysteries is SoCal. So that was fun because I've, been out to California a lot, and I have some family that live out there. So I was familiar with the setting, and it was fun to kind of get a change of scenery. So that was fun to write
Yeah.
with her.
What but the majority of the stories that you
That's
have
right.
told are in Texas.
Yes.
What
Yes.
is it about I take it you're from Texas?
That's correct.
I-
Yes. I
Is
grew
it
up in Texas, and then I moved around after I um, grew up and came back to Texas. So I live in Austin now.
Gotcha, gotcha. What is it about other than the fact that that Texas is gigantic and diverse because of its size? East Texas, like Dallas and east of there, is very different from Southwest Texas, like Marfa, or Central Texas, like Abilene, where I've spent a good bit of time. Um, it's almost like two different states in a lot of ways. What is it about this interesting cultural melting pot that is Texas that is so ripe for storytelling?
Well, I mean, from an author's perspective, it's nice because I don't get bored if I'm, you know, there's so many different types of settings here. I've written a story set in the piney woods of East Texas, which
Hmm.
is just this dense piney wood area. Then
Yeah,
I've written a series that's set on the Texas Gulf Coast, and it's more of, the coastal setting with the tides and all that. And then, I've written stories set in the cities, including Austin, where I live. And it's more of an urban setting for your story. And there's all the things that come with that, like a big city police department and
yeah,
big city crime, those sorts of things. And then the new book, Innocence Road, is set out in far West Texas near Marfa, which is completely different than any other part of the state. Um, it's just, you kind of have to see it to believe it. It's just so it's so different, and it's so vast is the thing that really hit me when I was visiting. Just the horizon just kind of goes on forever, and it's so remote
yeah,
and in some ways empty because it's so it's doesn't have a big population, and so it's you just have this kind of blank canvas if you're going to set a story there, which was exciting to me.
When you first start thinking of a new book, a new story, I'm fascinated with the moment of creation because at some point in time, Innocence Road does not exist in any form or fashion. It's just it doesn't exist, and then either a character walks onto the stage of your mind, or maybe you see a news story and you read it and you start kind of playing the what if game and well, what if this happened and this, and then you start casting that story with characters that come out of God knows where. And then, whatever the thing that establishes the story happens. And then Innocence Road does exist. And then it's your job as the author to dig that out of the ground, excavate it, dust it off, polish it up. And, then it comes out into the world. But what is that moment of creation for you where the Innocence Road springs to life?
Well, in this case, the setting was such an important starting point. I wanted it to be in far west Texas near Marfa. And I thought about using Marfa as the actual setting, but I like to do a fictional town when I'm going to create a story, especially one set in a small town, because then you can have a little bit more artistic license. If you
Yeah.
need to have a canyon, you can have a canyon. If you need a railroad track, you can have a railroad track. If you need a major highway, you can just kind of make it what you need for the story. And so you're not kind of beholden to getting the facts accurate. So it gives you a little more creative flexibility from a writing standpoint. So it's a fictional town in far west Texas, and it's inspired by Marfa. So it's got kind of it's a town in transformation. It's this little town in far west Texas where there's this desert and this arid climate, and it's a small population. So you kind of have all the conflicts that come with a small town where everybody's in each other's business. But at the same time, it's kind of at this gateway to national parks, and they've got this influx of tourism. And so they've got all these urbanites that have kind of fled the cities and they want to escape, the grind of city life. And so they've come out there thinking they're going to, start a new thing. And some people don't do well with that. They kind of bring all their big city expectations with them.
Yeah.
And so it's a town where they've kind of got this inherent conflict between the people that have been there all along and all these new urbanites that have kind of come in as tourists, and they're kind of driving up the prices, and they're kind of changing the culture of the town, and it creates conflict with the locals. So the setting was a real starting point for me in terms of the whole story kind of unfolding, and the setting has so much built-in conflict that it gave me a lot of ideas as to how the storyline was going to unfold.
Yeah. And national parks are such an interesting storytelling device because it's this carved out, set apart, interesting thing that's just different from everything around it in most cases. And the possibilities are endless when you start thinking about all of the things that you can do with it. That's I've never written a story around a national park, but I'll bet that's just alive with possibilities.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, I really enjoy the challenge of writing a wilderness story. I've written a couple of those where a lot of the action takes place in kind of a wilderness area where they're cut off from communication, and that can be part of the suspense plot. Especially now that we have so many devices where we're connected all the time, it's kind of refreshing to take a break from this idea that your characters are constantly in contact with other people, and they constantly have a cell phone in their hand, and they can always call for help or always, summon resources to help them out of a jam. So sometimes it's fun to do something where your character doesn't have all those tools and is more kind of cut off from civilization, especially if you're writing suspense, because you can kind of create more, more obstacles for your character to overcome if they are not constantly, in contact with people.
Yeah. The setting is fantastic. The the culture that surrounds the setting, becomes alive and electric. But without a character that we love and can lock on to, then you just have a pretty place, to write about. So where did the character of Leanne come from, and how did you start kind of unfolding who she was and what she's about and what she's going to get up to?
Yeah, Leanne, I really love this character. She's so full of contradictions. She's very gritty, and but what I really love about her is she's extremely resourceful. She's a police officer in this little town, and she's a detective. She got her training in Dallas and always wanted to leave her hometown and kind of in her rearview mirror and start a new life for herself in the city where she was not, where everyone wasn't in her business. And she's got she's got this very dysfunctional family that she was hoping to get away from and wanted to kind of create a new life for herself in the city of Dallas. But she gets kind of drawn back home by a lot of family dysfunction. And one of the events that draws her back is that her dad dies. And so she's kind of pulled back home to help her mother and her brother, who's got a bunch of problems. So she is kind of a reluctant hero in a way. She's back there reluctantly. She has a lot of ambivalence about being back there and whether she's going to stay. But in the midst of all this personal crisis, this murder case kind of falls into her lap, and she starts pursuing this murder investigation and trying to unravel what happened. And she just gets really tenacious about getting answers to questions. And the more people kind of slam the door in her face and kind of try to put obstacles in front of her, the more she's determined to figure out what's really going on. And so I really liked her tenacity, and I really liked her resourcefulness. And when she kind of would go up against a wall, she would have to find another way to get something done. And so I really wanted that to be kind of at the core of her character. So another thing that she's struggling with is that she's a woman in an all-male department, and also a small town where it's kind of a good old boy network. And she's kind of up against this kind of power structure that she is not really part of, but she's still trying to find ways to get things done. So she's constantly having to kind of go around obstacles and figure out ways to do things because she's got a lot of resistance, I would say.
I don't think it's giving too much away. It's a brand new book. I obviously don't want to give too much away. But there's a serial killer that is, keeps popping up. And that's one of the things that brings Leanne back to home. But a serial killer is an interesting thing to play on a small town where it's so close knit. Like you said, everybody's in each other's business. There's a level of trust that comes with a small community where neighbors lean on each other, and even though they're in each other's business, there's a close knit tightness that comes to a community like that where you really depend on each other. And the other side too. But I'm grasping for the word, but there's a trust that comes with that. And when you introduce a serial killer, that goes against everything that the small town stands for. It's this unknown entity who's wreaking havoc, and it really causes fear to blanket the town, which, like I said, goes against everything that kind of this small town stands for. What was the thought process of using that fear device on a town that should not have to deal with that kind of problem?
Well, I get a lot of inspiration from news stories and headlines that I read, and part of the inspiration for this story came from an actual story in Texas where a man was convicted of murdering his wife and spent more than 20 years in prison. And then new evidence emerged, and he was exonerated and released from prison. They found new
Wow.
DNA evidence that that implicated somebody else. And so I started to think about, just the ramifications of something like that, where, the victim's family thinks that they've gotten justice for their loved one, and this person lost years and years and years of their life. But it kind of all fell apart. They had the wrong guy, and everybody's been cheated. The victim's family has been cheated. The person who was wrongfully convicted was cheated. And so I was really interested in the idea of what happens to a community, especially a small town where it's a close-knit community where this happens. And so in the beginning of the book, Innocence Road, we learned that the most notorious crime in the history of the town, which was the brutal murder of a teenage girl, that the person that has been in jail for that for many, many years has been exonerated and released. And he's coming back, and he's got some scores to settle. And it reopens all these old wounds in this tight-knit community. And we learn about how at the time of his arrest, at the time of the murder and at the time of his arrest, the town was just really ripped apart, and there was a rift. Some people thought he was guilty, some people thought he was innocent, and it just kind of tore everybody apart. And, those old wounds have healed, but now they're reopening again as this crime and the case gets reopened. And so that's another one of the conflicts that Leanne is dealing with as a detective. So she's trying to kind of understand what happened in the past, and she's got all these rifts that she's dealing with in her town, in her community. And then she's also got a current murder investigation that she's trying to solve, and she starts to see connections between the previous crime and the crime that she's working on now. And so, but you see this kind of community kind of being torn apart by this, and all these old wounds being reopened. And that's part of what I wanted to, look at in the story is what's the effect on people.
Yeah. And if you want to know how that turns out, grab the book, obviously. Laura, if you are kind of driven by deadlines, like you've said earlier, and you have published all of these books, you must obviously have a style of work that helps you do that. I believe that writers exist on a continuum somewhere between pantser and plotter, like the two camps we love to put people in, but people kind of exist along that some way. Where on that line would you put yourself?
Well, I always start with a plan, so in that sense, I'm a plotter. I'm a really visual person. So I have a
Yeah.
storyboard, and it has pictures, photographs I've taken of the setting, or, magazine clippings, what the characters might look like. And it's very visual, and it helps me kind of get my mind in the story world. But then I also have a storyboard that's more about the plot of the story, and it has note cards, and I move them around. There will be action scene happening here, and maybe a quieter scene there, and it helps me with the pacing, because especially if you're writing suspense, pacing is really important. You want to keep the story moving forward. You want to keep a lot of energy in the story, but it can't be just back to back to back action. You have to give the reader a chance to also kind of absorb and get to know the characters a little bit. So pacing is really important, and you're trying to create a ticking clock where there's an urgency to the story. And so I start with these plans and this kind of outline, but then things always change. And I think, you have to kind of listen to your instincts. And if your instincts are that the story is too slow or it's getting boring, if you're bored and you're writing it, you know that your reader is going to be bored. And so it's time to change the plan and inject, a new, some action, or inject a new question, or inject just something exciting so that it moves. And so you always have to be open to kind of what your gut is telling you, because that's where I think sometimes the magic happens, where you start down a path and then you think, what if I did it differently? I thought it was going to be this, but what if it's something completely different? And sometimes that's the most creative moment.
Right. Do you enjoy the drafting or the editing stage more?
That's a tough one. The drafting is always harder because it's like you're just creating something out of nothing, and that's
Right.
really can be really hard. You kind of have to dig deep to do that. But it's also so satisfying, when you get to the end of a day and you've written something completely new and fresh, and maybe it took you in a direction you weren't expecting, and that's so much fun, and it can be really exhilarating. So it's kind of like a push pull. I love it, but it's also hard.
Yeah.
So I do love the drafting phase. The editing, I don't know. I they're both fun, but in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Innocence Road is available everywhere now. It dropped a couple of days ago, so it should be stocked in your favorite local bookstore. Go visit your local bookstore, support local books, grab a copy of it. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we'll put links to it in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon and pick up a copy. Laura, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all that you do, your great back catalog, follow along for news of upcoming projects, all of that, where's a good place to find you online and follow along?
Yeah, you can. I would love to hear from readers. I'd love to chat with people who are big readers. My website is lauragriffin.com, and I've got also links to social media there. So if you want to connect on social media, just check it out at lauragriffin.com.
Perfect. We'll link that up as well to make it easier for folks to find you. Laura, this has been so much fun chatting. We're going to send everyone to pick up a copy of Innocence Road. She's got it stacked right there above her shoulder. That's the cover you're looking for when you go in the store. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thanks for having me.